I'm a board operator.
I do audio description.
I'm a life coach, a speaker.
I'm a legal assistant.
I'm an executive in business and finance.
I'm a little person.
I'm also blind.
I am deaf.
And I'm a C4, C5 quadriplegic.
I'm an amputee father, an amputee grandfather. I'm a private pilot, and I'm a scuba diving instructor.
I am a team player. I live by the rules. I finish all my work on time. Never been late.
I find that being deaf isn't a negative thing at all. It's very positive, actually. I can see things from different perspectives, about different situations.
Just because I use a wheelchair does mean I'm also intellectually challenged.
I have autism, but my autism allows me to build Legos faster than people that usually could.
I need all my co-workers to treat me with respect.
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 RespectAbility.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Don Weinberg. I'm here in two capacities. One as a trustee and executive vice president of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, which does a good deal of funding in the disabilities area, and also as chairman of the Philanthropy Roundtable, which is located in Washington, D.C. So we've heard from people in government, and the assistant secretary gave me a terrific segue to get this started, because government programs and government laws and regulations do have their limitations sometimes as to flexibility. And of course we heard that we need to fight that, but I think what's really impressive in what's going on in the private sector, particularly with some of the larger companies that have the resources to really do what needs to be done. And just as an interesting statistic, which Jennifer and the folks at RespectAbility have put out recently, in 2015, there were 87,201 new people with disabilities entering the workforce. In 2016, that number went up to 343,483. We don't have the numbers yet, I assume, for 2017, but I would hope and I would think that they're even larger than 2016's. So our panel is about, why is this happening? Why are there more people with disabilities who are obtaining employment? And what can be done and what is being done to increase those numbers as the years go on? So we have on our panel, I'm assuming that everybody has familiarized themselves with the bios of our speakers. Janet Lebrecq is the only one who is unable to join us, but we have Ron Painter, from the National Association of Workforce Boards, right? Good morning. Jim Sinaki from J.P. Morgan Chase on the end, and Vincenzo Piscopo from Coca-Cola. And as we all agree, things go better with Coke.
Amen.
Right? I won't drink Pepsi. I told Vincenzo.
Amen.
Okay.
That's good.
So we're going to have a discussion up here. This is not going to be speeches. We're going to have a discussion about what people are actually doing. And let me put this out to our group here. Why are we having, at least from 2015 to 2016, a substantial, a four-fold increase in employment of people with disabilities? Who would like to start with that?
I'll be happy to start.
Okay, Jim.
It's interesting. I've been in this area for 35 or more years. I worked for IBM for 39, retired, and J.P. Morgan Chase roped me in for my latest 2-year stint. But the reason why I came back to work, because the marketplace is changing. And I do believe in a piece I wrote as I thought about this, I think there's a new dawn for disability inclusion in the 21st century. And why that's important is that technology, which is the great equalizer for people with disabilities, has really afforded us the opportunity to get into the workplace and stay in the workplace. And we've seen it when it comes to the various modes of transportation, the fact that the ADA has just had its, what, 28th or 29th anniversary. It's here to stay, thank goodness. So I think all the stars are aligning in the right place for people to feel encouraged to be included and being sought after a new source of talent for companies in the workplace.
Let me echo, I would agree with Dawn. I think as I travel the country, it's not unusual for me to come across local areas, regional areas with an unemployment rate of 3%. But still the drive by business for talent. And I would agree, technology has really been an enormous advantage for a whole lot of folks to get into the labor force. And I think the continuing need, the focus on skills, the rapid development of all kinds of technology, I think has really been a part of that. Plus, I think the focus, and I really do want to credit to Vince and to Jim the focus of private employment on inclusion and diversity in the labor force, and I think that has certainly been an enormous part of the story to date.
Vincenzo, I know I wanted to have you focus on this. You have talked and written extensively about the following theme, that charity is not a sustainable way to include people with disabilities in the workforce. It's not a sustainable way to do much other than charity. You've talked about the fact that hiring talented people with disabilities is smart, not charity. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I've been injured for 8 years, and in my 8 years of this world, I have met amazing people, with disability, with extreme, with skills that are just incredible, and that has made me think that there is a value that people with disability bring to the table that is, that is beyond the typical, and that value is created by the circumstances that people with disability have to live, right? So that make people with disability be more resilient, that make people with disability be more perseverant, and so on. And also, develop, because people with disability are constantly facing challenges. We develop a ability to problem solve that is beyond the medium, right? Because we're constantly exercising that muscle of the creativity, right? So that has made me, realize that, when companies hire people with disability, they're actually adding value to their company and not doing charity. And that's why I've been pushing a lot of the conversation around making companies understand that hiring people with disability is not just right, but it's smart, right? Because when you're hiring people with disability, you're hiring people that, on top of all their talents, they are used to face challenges, and therefore they're used to overcome challenges. And what a best skill to have in the corporate world than somebody that knows how to face and solve challenges. You bring into a table a person that is perseverant, that works hard because he has to be working hard all his life to accomplish things because it's more difficult for him. So what a better person than a person that works hard to have in your staff. So when you think about all those things, you realize, you know what, it's not just right. I mean, it is right, but it's actually smart because it's adding value to your company and it's adding value to society. And it's actually adding value for everybody, because the more people that we have with disability higher, the more value that is being added, and the less value that is being subtracted, because you're not dependent on all the social benefits.
Now, some of you in our private conversations to prepare for this have said to me that some of your applicants and ultimately employees with disabilities actually have advantages over many people without disabilities. Could you tell us a little about that? Either one of you, or Ron for that matter.
I think one advantage is problem solving. When I talk to our managers about hiring a person with a disability, I talk to them about the 80-20 rule. Most managers around the world get bios or resumes from people with disabilities and able-bodied people. And about 99% of those managers call a person into an interview based on that piece of paper. And so I questioned them. I said, so why is it when a person with the disabilities bio's in front of you that you doubt that person can do the job? I said, when you bring in an able-bodied person, they have 80% of the skills you need for them to do the job. All you have to do is teach them the 20%. And I said, it's the same thing with the person with a disability. You have to teach them the 20%. Because they're in your office, they're in a wheelchair, or they're blind, or they have, they're deaf, etc. And they're there. They're there at 8 in the morning when you call them in. They're dressed up, hopefully, we're all dressed up, our first interview. And I say, so all things considered, what are you fearful about? And this is what I tell my managers at the firm. And what they're fearful of is the visceral reaction able-bodied people have regarding people with disabilities. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, they're afraid of being politically incorrect. And when I've got those questions, when I talk to our employees, they say, Jim, what do I say when I meet a person with a disability? I said, how about hello? How about, would you like a cup of coffee? Can I help you to your table? And it's not that they're bad people, they just don't want to be disrespectful or make a mistake. And so I think, based on your question, Don, I feel a responsibility to help my able-bodied colleagues get there. We, as people with disabilities, we own that. And I tell people with disabilities that in my firm, I says, you have to own your disability. You just don't wait for a manager to go to you and say, hey Jim, do you want to be a vice president tomorrow? That never happens, right? It may happen for the folks that come out of the top B schools, but it didn't happen to me. So, but you've got to tell people with disabilities, own your disability and help your colleagues on the other side understand what you need, what you want, and that you could collaborate.
Now, Vincenzo, at Coca-Cola, what specifically are you all doing to, grease the wheels, so to speak, for people with disabilities?
So we have like three big focus in Coca-Cola. One is marketplace, the other one is workplace, and the other one is community. And we as a Coca-Cola company believe that we are as strong as the communities we serve. And therefore, for us, people with disability is a big focus. And within people with disability, we focus a lot of youth development and youth empowerment. And so through our foundation, the Coca-Cola Foundation, we give grants to several organizations that serve the disability community, because we believe that at the end of the day, those are our consumers, and those are going to be our employees. So the Coca-Cola Foundation helps that. From a marketplace perspective, one of the things that we're doing right now is actually demonstrating our marketeers the importance of people with disability as consumers. And I'm very big with that because I keep on telling them, when you, through your commercial, through advertising, you talk to somebody with a disability, you're first getting their loyalty. But you're not getting the loyalty only of the person with disability, you're getting the loyalty of their family, of their friends, and so on. So actually, the dollars that you're investing in marketing are going the extra mile. So that's something that we're trying to encourage our marketeers to think about that population. And it's a huge population, and we know that the purchasing power is huge. And we're not leveraging it. We're not taking advantage of that because we don't talk to that. You see in a lot of the commercial, and not only Coca-Cola, you hardly see somebody that has a disability. You hardly, all our, commercial or our web are not talking to all the abilities. And so that's what we're trying to do. we're very happy because, we had in our Super Bowl somebody with disability, so we're very proud. The guy was doing flips in his wheelchair. That's not me, but we did it. And then the other one is in the workplace. And the workplace, we're doing a lot of the things that with some of the things that Jim was mentioning, and I'm going to partner with Jim to learn more about what they're doing at Chase, because that's incredible. But there's 3 prongs of what we're doing in the workplace. One is what Jim was saying, making people comfortable around people with disability. It's like it doesn't have to feel weird, just like feel. And so that we're doing more things like I have a service dog, so I bring my service dog to Coke, and that is making people more comfortable about being with me, because they forget about me and they talk to my dog. But it's part of the objectives anyways. And also, so the making people comfortable and creating the awareness is one. The other thing is actually showing senior management of the value that people with disability bring to the table. And that's something that I'm big, because obviously I'm a person with disability, and I fight for this community, but I have met people that are extremely brilliant that have a disability, and those people are not being used. So those is value that is being thrown to the garbage. Why don't we take advantage of that? And that's something that I've been pressing a lot with our senior management, to open their eyes with the different abilities. And then finally, making sure that our organization is accessible, right? It's accessible for all types of abilities. And one of the things there that I'm very doing, across everything, is actually focusing on the abilities and not on the disabilities, right? Because at the end of the day, are the abilities the one that add value. And if you focus on those abilities, then you get the value. So, good.
So Ron, what are you seeing in the field in terms of the increase in people with disabilities working, and what's driving that, and what can drive it more?
Well, I think on our side, when WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, came in, I think there were a lot of people who thought this was a subtle change to federal policy, and it wasn't. It's a very deliberate and a very new generation, I guess, of federal investment, and that had to do with the fact that the focus became on in-demand occupations, and that has led, as more employers look for talent, that has led to a big focus on industry sector work, partnerships with employers, but also a focus on credentials and competencies. Going back to what Vincenzo said, I mean, individuals that can demonstrate competency that employers are looking for are employees that are in demand. And again, I think with technology, this focus on credentials and competencies is also part of the great leveler that's going on in the labor force. So we're watching a lot of focus by employers at looking more at what are the skills that I actually need. How do I know that an individual has that skill? So we think that as workforce boards become more strategic partners with business, which is happening all over the place, because of a lot of focus also on work-based learning. So we're watching internships, on-the-job training. The Assistant Secretary mentioned apprenticeship, and there's really some pretty amazing apprenticeship projects that are going on with persons with disabilities in truck driving, in CDL licensing, in the technology field. We're watching some really amazing kind of apprenticeship programs being developed. So I think this focus in WIOA on in-demand and its corollary in what are the competencies, how can I demonstrate competency, better focus from employers on what are those skills. Now that's not to say there's still not a lot of work to be done. Jim mentioned people scanning resumes and keywords and all that stuff, but I think increasingly companies are looking for that competency and that credential. And again, I think that's a tremendous opportunity for individuals to demonstrate first competency, and then secondly, like the rest of the individual. So I think those are big parts that I think are embedded in WIOA.
You know, it seems that an implication of what you're all saying is that increasing technology, automation, and artificial intelligence actually could be beneficial for people with disabilities with good minds.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think about, so when you look at, one of the really cool things for me is I get to hang out with some of the folks who are working on robotics and artificial intelligence, and it's, at times it's like a kid in a candy store. It's like crazy, crazy cool stuff. But yeah, you think of things like autonomous trucks. You think about things like warehouses that rely not on physical labor, but rely on technology to manage the warehouse, to fill orders. You think about what's coming in terms of autonomous automobiles. Yeah, I just think this is a really amazing opportunity.
So automation could be a great equalizer.
I do think so. I think it has tremendous potential.
You know, the reason I asked that, and I do want to hear what everyone thinks about this, is back in October, and Jennifer was there, there was a conference session at the round table where there was a debate between two guys. One is Andrew Yang, who's running for president, and the other is Mark Mills from the Manhattan Institute. And the question was, automation, is this going to be the end of jobs? Is there going to be massive unemployment? And Yang was saying basically yes, and Mills was saying no, there are going to be new jobs. And the thing is that the more there are jobs that rely on the mind versus the body, that there will be new skills to learn and people can learn them, and people with disabilities, I think, are in a terrific position to really be competitive in as we go into this future of automation and AI and so forth. What do you guys think in terms of what you guys are doing at Coke and at JP Morgan Chase in terms of your business?
I got two things that, you know, after being paralyzed since I'm 25, so I was able-bodied once, a long time ago, but you know, for many of you may know this or not, our folks on the neurodiversity spectrum on autism outperform able-bodied people in certain jobs. I mean, you know, who would have thought 30 years ago that an able-bodied person could be outdone by anyone with a disability? But we're starting to see that today, and that's because of their coding skills, their enhancement in terms of focus, and we can't keep autism people on the bench when we have people on the spectrum that are available to work for our technology group. They're snapped up immediately, and so, you know, that's a new change. The other thing I wanted to say, based on the last conversation, is that we have a responsibility as a disabled population to help educate our colleagues who are able-bodied. One of the biggest questions I get, and I allay their fears, is that they go, Jim, do you have slots just for people with disability? And the answer is no. I don't hold any slots, I don't hold any jobs. What I do is say, I tell our folks who come to look for work, I say, go to our website, look at the thousands of jobs we have, and I think we got more than 10 or 20,000 jobs at any one time around the world. And I say, you pick the job that you're qualified for, and then let me know, and I can put them through my fast track disability inclusion team. But they're applying for and getting interviewed for the very same jobs able-bodied people are getting. So that's important to know. And that tells the able-bodied population that we're not lowering standards, we're not doing anything underhanded, and they compete and qualify like anybody else. And one incident that happened, and I mentioned it last night to our board, was that the disabled community sometimes goes to our recruiters and says, okay, what jobs do you have for disabled people? And we say, we don't have any. We have jobs for qualified people. That's how we do it. And I think that the folks in this room should embrace that and talk eye to eye with people and say, we're not looking for a handout, right? You're gonna qualify here. And given that you qualify here, you have every opportunity to advance from the mailroom to the boardroom.
Did you have anything to add, Vincenzo, to that?
No, the only thing that I was going to say, somehow related to that question, that one of the things that has that is benefiting people with disability and people in general is how the workplace is changing, that it's becoming more flexible. So the fact that more and more and that's allowed thanks to technology, the fact that more and more companies are allowing their employees to work from home or to work remotely and all that, that is a great opportunity for people with disability that, you know, it might take too long for them to get dressed and all that, and, you know, to go to work, or they feel more comfortable at home, for whichever reason. So the flexibility at work of scheduling, you know, that, you know, you have flexible time, you can come later, leave later, which is a big change from, you know, 20 years ago, is also facilitating the work of people with disability, and obviously technology is allowing that.
Can I just kind of comment on that? Vincenzo's right. Some of the problems with that is that if you work from home, you're not really part of the culture, and it can impede your advancement. I mean, what I find is when you work with people face to face, they get to know you, they talk to you, they get a feel for you. And yes, you know, I'm allowed to work from home sometimes, and other people are. And I don't know that the industry is there yet completely. The fact that you have flexibility is good, but I think to advance in corporate life, you have to be seen and heard and present. So I think there's a fine balance with that.
Yeah.
You know, I just throw that out there.
Or one of you used the term virtuous circle. Do you remember which one of you had discussed it? Was that you, Jim? But the idea that the more people without disabilities get used to working with people with disabilities, there's a virtuous circle in the sense that people get used to it, it becomes the norm, and it's not a big deal, and that would of course include employers for whom having it be no big deal would mean that more people with disabilities would have greater opportunities.
But I think that's right. I don't know that I use that word, but I like it.
Luckily, I wasn't recording.
So I'll take it. What I found is what I do. Look, I'm a C5, C6 quadriplegic. I'm awkward. My fingers don't work. I can't feel. But I don't go to work, and I'm not saying you implied this, but I don't go to work talking about the latest wheelchair on the market, or I don't talk about the Paralympians, you know, 365 days of the year. What I do go to work with, and I tell people, I'm married 30 years to the same woman. I have 2 kids. I have 2 grandkids. I like sports. And that's how we build relationships. We build relationships with our colleagues by, you know, and I do sometimes talk about my disability when they ask, or if I sense they're uncomfortable. But I build relationships based on our company values, our values, and what we have in common. And I find that I get yelled at like everybody else. I also get listened to like everybody else. And that's the whole point of us ingratiating ourselves into society and making people feel comfortable with us. I think we have to own that. We have to own making people who are able-bodied feel comfortable with us. I think that's our job to do. Now, if they still obstinate, well, that's their problem. Then I give it back to them, right? So I think we have that responsibility.
Ron, anything you wanted to add?
No, I like that characterization, and I guess, I mean, I'd have to agree somewhat with both Vincenzo and with Jim. I mean, I think the fact that you can work remotely does have advantages because of technology. But I also agree that what some of the research that I have seen says, you know, when we do that remoteness, we lose a certain contextual working relationship with each other. And when we talk to employers, that ability to work in a team, the ability for communication skills is the thing that we hear over and over. It's Jim's, the last 20% that employers talk to us constantly about is the reliability, is that communication skill and that ability to work in teams. And I guess maybe I'm old school. I do agree that sometimes that is actually the face-to-face repartee that we engage in with the fellow members of the team. And I do think it's a balance.
Now, we'd like to invite people in the audience to pose questions, make comments, and we don't see who's set up. Do we have a microphone or anything like that? Depending upon.
Right here.
Okay, so we have a few of them here.
Wait,
so
Christina over here and myself as well.
we'll let you navigate all that, and we'll hear comments, questions. Luckily, we have plenty of time for that. 25 minutes.
So my question is,
Can you say who you are? Can you say who you are?
My name is Mean Canada. You should all know me.
But if we don't, tell us.
If we don't.
Just in case.
Just my name? Okay. So anyone can answer, but I'm mainly asking Jim and Vincenzo. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Your names. So my question is, what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to face working in a corporation? And what is the culture that you would, what aspect of the culture would you change?
So I really go into, because I've been working in corporations so long, I understand corporate environment. And so it's my job, if I'm coming in as a leader, I have to behave as a leader, think as a leader, act as a leader. I am nervous, I know I'm a quadriplegic, and I know what they're thinking. So it's like a reverse psychology. I know what I have to work on to get the leadership to be comfortable with me. That's my job. So, and I don't think, I don't want to, I feel it's not their responsibility at all. If I fail at that, I fail, not the company. So I understand the culture, I know how it's done, and look, quite honestly, the culture at Chase was terrific. When I was onboarded during my first 3 months on the job, I met Jamie Dimon, the chairman, and every one of his direct reports. I was taken to interviews for a half hour and met with everyone. They wanted them to know what I was going to do worldwide. And then I met the head of HR, the area I'm in, and all of her direct reports and his direct reports. So I was onboarded the first 2 months of my tenure there with the top leadership. And I got to listen to them, they got to listen to what I wanted to do, and that's how the firm did it. So this wasn't a force by JPMC, it was what they wanted to do, and the leadership felt Jim has to be introduced to everyone because he's working worldwide. So I have to carry that, that's all my responsibility. Every time I went into an interview with one of the top CEOs, I was nervous as hell. I knew if I said the wrong thing, acted the wrong way, I could be torpedoed. But that's Jim Sinaki thinking that way, it's not them. And I had a narrative for everyone I talked to before I went in. So there's a lot of prep. What I'm trying to say, people with disabilities don't get a buy in corporate life. If we don't perform, we don't belong there. And I think that's what a lot of us have in our jobs today. Well, it's the same thing in my role. I don't get a buy because I'm disabled. And I like it like that, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, were you going to answer that question?
No, but there's more questions.
Oh,
so
more,
we'll-
okay,
yeah.
good. So let's have the next one.
Hi, Deb Cotter. I'm currently looking for a job, so I'd like to talk with all of you afterwards. You mentioned technology as a level playing field. Well, for people like me with multiple sensory and hidden disabilities such as vision and hearing loss, technology is completely inaccessible. So when I apply for jobs online, it's impossible. I just wonder what can be done about some of this stuff. Even when I try and learn how to use some of these assistive technology devices, it's just a nightmare.
Who wants to tackle that? Who's best qualified to tackle that?
Wow.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, other than to say, I think 1 in 12 American workers turns to the American Job Centers across the U.S. And I really think that part of that is how well the board and the AJC has ingratiated and embedded themselves in corporate strategy. We do see, and there is a lot of conversation around this notion of online applications. It's very easy. excuse me. It's easy to do. It's easy for recruiters, for corporations to handle large volumes of applications that way, but we also know that there's a lot of people who they miss that are very, very capable. So I think I would encourage you to go back to if you've not been to the AJC, to go again and continue to work with them on industries that are in their target area. You know, sorry I don't have better advice.
Now, just to ask you a back question, based on what Ron said, was that at all helpful, or was your experience, did you already try that?
I've gone to VR and I've been to the Department of Employment Services here in the district, which isn't much help.
Okay.
Well, look, the dual disability or more is very difficult to solve. I've had experience with this already, and it's taken months to get folks through, depending on the job, depending on the responsibility, to find an accommodation that works. I haven't been unsuccessful yet, but I've gotten close. And the idea, it's just hard to replace the human capacity in terms of what we're given at birth or not given, and fix it with technology. We're not there yet completely. At my firm, and I can't divulge anything, I've been involved with several cases that are daunting, but those people are still employed until, you know, we can make the best accommodations possible. It's not that we don't want to accommodate. Sometimes we don't have the right solution to accommodate. It may not exist even. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, but that's the reality.
Who's next?
Yeah.
Please.
Hi, my name is Patrick Gaston. I am an advisor with the Steve Fund, and we focus on the emotional and mental health, well-being of people of color, and we do a combination of research, advocacy, partnerships, particularly with colleges and universities. And so my question to the panelists is that what is your view of the experience of people of color with disabilities? Are there certain aspects of their experience that might be different? What are some of the interventions that you might be engaged in to promote a more inclusive environment for them? And then also, what are the challenges that you see in that environment?
Well, disability is colorblind, number one, right? It doesn't matter what gender, race, nationality you are. What I'm finding, though, to your question, is that, so we have the disability business resource groups across the board. Black, Hispanic, gay, lesbian, women, Asian, people with disabilities. Within each of those groups, the disability population is disenfranchised. And so I am going to each one of my groups. I'm going to my Hispanic group, my Black group, my GLBT group, and say, look, here's the data regarding people with disabilities in your group. I'm not seeing coming through my first year and a half in terms of who I'm recruiting. So those groups, I don't know what the right term to use is. Jen, maybe you could tell me, but they're disenfranchised by group. So we know the issues of the Black population. Your people with disabilities who are Black have it worse. And matter of fact, their colleagues don't even know that they have it worse. So we're raising awareness with each group to say, I want you to look at your Hispanic population, your gay population, etc., and find those people so we can bring them into the business if they're qualified. So there is more work to do across the board, but our own constituency groups, it's not on their radar screen because we're all working on, you know, our own inclusion efforts, but there is a subgroup that needs it. And I think it's like that all over the world. The disability group is probably the most disenfranchised group in the world.
So my question is for Jim and Vincenzo. My name is Aaron Kaufman with the Jewish Federation of North America, and my question is not directed at my experience at JFNA because it's just the best place I've ever worked. But my question is that is twofold, and it is, number one is when I encounter people, again, not at my job, but in the public or in the community generally, they will often assume that because I have cerebral palsy, I have an intellectual disability, and in fairness to them, there are some people with cerebral palsy that have intellectual disabilities, but do you encounter that, either of you, like people talking down to you, assuming that you're not all that bright? And secondly, when oftentimes for various jobs I've had, I've been the first person with a disability that they've ever hired, or the first person in a long time. So I always feel, for lack of a better word, a burden, like, oh, I better never not screw this up, so that they don't hire somebody with a disability ever again. So I just wondered if my experiences were limited to me, or if you had any of those, the pressures, the responsibility about, making a good example that people with disabilities were good employers, and convincing people that just because you're in a chair doesn't mean you're not, like, college educated and things like that.
So for me, I've been lucky at Coke because I was hired by Coke before I got my disability, and then I got my disability, and that actually was excellent for me and also for the community of people with disability at Coke, because basically what it did was show to them that I'm still the same person and I'm still adding value to the organization, and the fact that now I use my wheels instead of my leg has no implication in my job. So I was very lucky with them, and that allowed them to open their eyes to see, that people with disability do bring value to the table. But I do have, I have encountered the same thing, that people see you in a wheelchair and they assume that you are not smart, or that you are, like one example that I always make is, I was in a business trip in Toronto, and so I had, I was wearing a suit and all that, and then I had dinner in this amazing restaurant there, and then I didn't want to take a taxi to the hotel because it was close enough, and I preferred to roll. So I was rolling by myself, and it got to a point that it was a curve that I couldn't manage, so I asked a group of ladies to help me, and one of the ladies had a bag of leftover food from her restaurant. She said, "Sir, would you like to have some of the food? We just had dinner and we have some left over. Would you like to have some?" And so they assumed that because I was in a wheelchair, I was homeless. So that's something that happens. But what I think is that, what I tell people, especially young people, when they go to work, is that, the disability, if it's obvious, it's obvious, and if it's not obvious, it's not obvious. You don't have to bring it to the table if you don't have to. And this is what I'm trying to say. It's not that I'm saying that you need to hide it, but it's not something. It's like, if you're blonde and you go to work, you're not telling everybody, "Hey, listen, I'm blonde," So right. So you folk, or you don't say, "Hey, listen, I'm black." So the same thing with people with disability. You just go, you just have to be yourself and bring to the table the best of you, like everybody else. And the disability is part of you, the same thing as your color of the skin, and that's the same thing as your height and all that. So I think that's the focus that needs to be, because one of the things that we have to do is just make sure that people realize that you are more than your disability. And the way that you show people that you're much more than your disability is when, even for yourself, that disability is like third or fourth in your resume, if you think about it, right? So.
Well, let me add the practical side of that. The practical side is when we get folks with disabilities, we always ask, we ask if they have it. And if they do walk in and they do have it, we make sure if they need an interpreter, that person is there during the interview. So the manager can conduct the interview with the interpreter if that deaf person needs it. If you have other issues, we also like to know that, to see if we could make the interview go smoothly. Because you got to remember, there's probably less than 1% of managers that are interviewing people with disabilities. So they don't know what to expect. So that's a great question you had. And so when even now, we just changed our recruiting strategy. We have questions that say, tell us if you need an accommodation and tell us what you want on your first day of interviews. So the more we know, the more we can help you be prepared to answer the questions and get a job. If you walk in and the manager doesn't know what you have or what you, or what have you, they don't know how to respond. So we've got to meet them halfway. So if you tell us, we'll provide that accommodation on day of interview, and that's part of our process now. We've got to give the able-bodied people a little bit more credit, especially if they're hiring people with disabilities. They want to hire. Matter of fact, in my company, they're expected to hire, and they don't want to fail. And so help us help them not fail.
Last question.
Great. Best for last.
Better make it good. You're the last one.
Hi everyone, my name is Diego Mezcal, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I started my own organization called Together International, and we focus on supporting entrepreneurs with disabilities because we fundamentally believe that everybody with a disability is an entrepreneur because they're solving problems every day. And so my question is around entrepreneurship and sort of how are you thinking about entrepreneurship within your companies, and more specifically, are you thinking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship for people with disabilities within your companies?
I would kick that off first and say, wow, I'm glad you brought that up. What a great idea. If somebody doesn't want to hire you, create your own company. There's a lot of the workforce boards across the US that are investing in entrepreneurship training. There are a number of workforce boards that are working with startups. A remarkable project in Florida, workforce board working with the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center at the University of Florida. The idea is, can we step in as the workforce system with that next employee, whether that's on-the-job training, entrepreneurship, incumbent worker training, how can we help entrepreneurs succeed? So I think it's a great comment to make, because I think there is increasingly support not only in workforce but in economic development around entrepreneurship. So what a great last comment to put in.
Anything from?
Yeah, I think there is. I'm working with my supply and diversity people to hire businesses that are run by disabled-owned businesses. So that's the big thing. Internally, it's folks with disabilities can get on board and kind of work the way they work with their ideas. I think that's important. Matter of fact, before I got to the firm, no one thought about changing the paradigm of a company like Chase to be more inclusive of people with disabilities. So my firm is right for change, but it's not all just about jobs. It's about how we approach the marketplace. How do we respect those? As a matter of fact, if you're a disabled individual, you don't have to sell disabled services. You could sell able-bodied services. Who cares? Right? We don't care who we buy from as long as the product's great. So I would say don't limit yourself. And that's the best answer I have right now. Call me in a year, I may have a better answer. So.
Did you see John's Crazy Socks?
No. Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, so there's this kid with Down syndrome who's an adult, and his dad is helping him, and they created this johnscrazysocks.com. Check it out. Well, thank you very much, panelists. It's been great. I hope you and the audience have enjoyed our discussion and the back and forth. And thank you for your attention.
Before the panel goes, I just want to say a few things about these panelists. They're not just panelists who've done an amazing job today. They are strategic partners of the work of RespectAbility. So I just want to say that J.P. Morgan Chase, that Rodney Hood is here, and that he and Jim are really strategic partners of RespectAbility. And I also want to bring attention to a philanthropy thing that J.P. Morgan Chase has done. They were the first company in the world to do this, which is that they are donating money to social action and activist organizations that help people address poverty, particularly communities of color and English language learners, to enable a centralized access fund so that people with disabilities who have multiple minority status, i.e. they're a person of color, English language learner, etc. These are largely empowerment organizations for financial success, for people to get jobs and entrepreneurship. That JP Chase was the first organization to recognize that these existing national nonprofits dealing with poverty did not include people with disabilities, and that's very important. And for those of you who haven't seen it in the news, there's a major problem right now that the environmental movement has excluded people with disabilities to such an extent that a new law was passed to ban straws in a city in California, and many people with mobility impairments literally cannot drink or eat without plastic straws. And there is now a $1,000 fine for using plastic straws because of the lack of intersectionality between communities that care about social justice or making the world a better place and the inclusion of people with disabilities. Donna Walton is here. She's going to lead a panel on intersectionality later. But JP Chase not only is 100% rated by Inclusion In, or Disability In, which used to be called the USBLN, for their great employment practices, that they are also doing it with their philanthropy, and we consider them a major partner of Respectability. Coca-Cola, Enzo is a new partner of ours, and we are delighted that Coca-Cola is a new partner of Respectability, particularly focusing on women and girls who are Hispanic and speak Spanish in America. We are particularly excited about working with Coca-Cola to enable women and girls for whom English is a second language who have disabilities to succeed. Ron Painter at the Workforce Boards, we exhibit at his conferences, we speak at his conferences. He is a really valued partner. So I just want to say something about the Workforce Boards, which is that they are part of a $17 billion a year system, $17 billion a year system to enable people with barriers to work to get included in the economy. That being in touch with your local and your state workforce boards is one of the most important things that the disability community can do. That the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act law, which is new, is now mandated that they include people with disabilities in all of their work. Again, $17 billion a year in funding. But that many of the people in the system, as you heard from somebody who reached out to them, are completely brand new to this. And they need partners. And we in the disability community should be partners for them to help them succeed. And I've saved last for Don Weinberg because he introduced himself with two hats, one the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, and two that he is chair of the very important Philanthropy Roundtable. But I also want to recognize that along with Shelley, if you don't mind standing up or raising your hand, that Shelley Cohn and Don Weinberg and I were the three co-founders of Respectability, and we are celebrating our 5th anniversary, and that Don was our very first chairman, and he did an extraordinary job as our very first chairman, so he still serves as chair emeritus to Respectability. And it was his vision as a major philanthropist, his foundation, for those who don't know, Google Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. They give away $100 million a year, every single year. And I know I'm speaking, I hope it's okay to speak for you for Don, that Don was frustrated that year after year that he was not seeing progress, that people with disabilities, it was a handout and not a hand up. The work we do at Respectability is generally outside the scope of what they do, which is direct service for people experiencing poverty, including people with disabilities. But that he and his vision were core critical to the founding of this organization 5 years ago, and we would not be here if it was not for Don being our very first chairman. So Don Weinberg, I just want to give you a real special thanks for being our visionary leader, and thank you.